Hello traders, this is Robert Kinman, also known as Trade the Level on YouTube and Twitter. It is November 12th, 2017. Let's get in. Let's get see what we can find for a directional bias for the week. Alright, everyone should be seeing a chart. Right now is the US dollar currency index, the Dixie. As of right now, it looks like we have a little bit of a gap. We are currently underneath the weekly pivot and above the monthly pivot. I could possibly see price coming down to test the monthly pivot. Let's see if I get this working. Coming down, testing the monthly pivot, possibly heading higher. Or if price continues to head higher, I would expect the dollar to continue to gain strength. Euro dollar. Euro dollar, pretty much the same pivot this week. We didn't really get much price action last week at all. We're currently above the weekly pivot. Price is currently coming down to test that weekly pivot. While it is above this weekly pivot, continue to look for price to head higher towards the monthly and the yearly. So from the weekly, in this area here is going to be the yearly quarterly pivot, and this is going to be the monthly pivot here. If price does get above this, my bias for the pair is going to change to start being long, but as it's below the monthly right now, I'm looking for price to kind of bounce around this area. If it does get below this weekly pivot, I'll be looking for price to continue to head lower. Okay, US dollar, Canadian dollar. Well, price has been respecting this lower trend line here. Price has sort of created a downward wedge. Price has started to bounce off. I'm looking for first level resistance to be here at the weekly pivot, which is going to be at the 1.2720-ish level. If price does get above this, continue to look for price to head higher. If price ends up, if this area does hold and price does start getting below this trend line, we could be looking for a break for the pair to head lower. Alright, pound dollar. Pound dollar came up, tested the monthly pivot, and has already started heading lower. Price is currently below the weekly pivot. Our first level of support is going to be right here at the yearly pivot at the 1.300 line, 1.300. While below the weekly pivot, continue to look for price to head lower to test this pivot point. If we get below this pivot, I'd expect pound dollar to continue to head lower. But as of right now, while below, look for price to head down, test the yearly pivot. Australian dollar to the US dollar. Currently coming down, testing the yearly quarterly pivot. This is going to be the first level of support. Look for price to break below for the pair to change its bias to head lower. If this does hold, I would wait for price to get above the weekly pivot, which is currently at the 0.7660 level. I would look for it to find some support here and then to head higher. See if we can get this working. There we go. New Zealand dollar. New Zealand dollar last week bounced off the monthly pivot and continued to head lower. It is currently resting at the yearly pivot and is just below the weekly pivot. It's kind of a key area right now. If price breaks above, there's a lot of confirmation right here, but we need to see which way it's going to go. Price can come straight up from here, or it could start to head lower. If price does come up, look for the first level of resistance to be the monthly pivot, which is currently at the 69.64 level. If price does stay below this level, continue to look for price to sell lower, and possibly any pullbacks to this trend line. Dollar Swiss. Currently price is retraced back to the weekly pivot. I'll be looking for this area to hold currently for price to head lower. If price does get above this, I'm going to be looking for price to get above the yearly pivot, where the price has plenty of room to move higher. Just kind of keep an area between these two levels. Anything above the 0.9970 level and the yearly pivot here, which is currently at the 0.9993 level, kind of look at that as a no trade zone. This area has been offering a lot of resistance. We really want to make sure it breaks before heading higher. Okay, this is the dollar yen. Dollar yen bounced off the monthly pivots, currently heading towards the weekly. Right now, I sort of have a bearish bias with the dollar yen, and this has to do with what's been going on with the bond market. However, while price is in between these two levels, I'm staying out of this pair. If we get a below the monthly, I'll be looking for price to come down and test the yearly pivot. If we get above the weekly, I'll be keeping a close eye on price, because if price does decide to break out higher, this pair has plenty of room to keep on going. Okay, Euro Pound. Euro Pound is breaking off of the quarterly pivot for the year. Also, we are getting above the monthly pivot, and we're above the weekly pivot. Right now, we have plenty of support for price to continually to head higher. If price does decide to turn around, wait for price to break below the weekly pivot and below this quarterly pivot for the pair to head lower. Got a little trend line here. So this whole area here is going to be like your no trade zone. Look for it to act as a support or resistance, and wait for price to respect it, and then look for a trade entry for it to head higher or to head lower. Euro Japanese yen. Price is currently retraced to the weekly pivot. We are currently just above it, and we're sitting just under the monthly pivot. Look for price either to head below this or above the monthly pivot. I would expect this pair currently to head lower the way things are looking. Any break below the weekly pivot. This level is currently at 132.31. If price does head higher, and you want to trade this higher, look for immediate resistance right around the 132.75 level. Okay, here's the pound yen. Pound yen bounced right off the monthly pivot. It's currently heading lower to test the yearly pivot point. Look for price to find some resistance here. This level is currently at the 148.83.80 level. While price is below the weekly, I'd like to see price stay suppressed here and continue to head lower. If the weekly pivot does hold, wait for a break above the monthly pivot before trying to get long, as this area has offered so much resistance in the past. Moving over to pound CAD. Last week, the pound CAD bounced right off the weekly pivot and started heading lower. We opened this week below the weekly pivot. There is a gap right here. If the gap is to get filled, I would be looking for price to for the weekly pivot to hold and for the pair to continue to head lower. If price does decide to head up, the monthly pivot was going to be the first level of resistance, and that is currently at the 1.6868 level. Euro Swiss. Alright. Euro Swiss currently above the monthly and the weekly. I've been waiting for the pair to head back and possibly test this lower trend line after it broke down. We are also breaking this upper trend line currently. As of right now, with the bar currently above the weekly, I'll be looking for price to continually to head higher and test the yearly R2 level. If this level does break, keep an eye on it for the pair to continue to head higher. If price does get below the weekly, look for this weekly pivot level to act as support. Anything below that, I'll be looking for it to head down to the yearly quarterly pivot, which this level is currently at 1.1535. Monthly pivot is currently at 1.1572, and the weekly pivot, this is at 1.1598. Australian dollar, Japanese yen. Price last week bounced off the monthly pivot and started heading lower. Price is sort of trapped in a very corrective channel. Price is currently below the weekly pivot. I'm currently looking for the weekly pivot to hold and for price to continually head lower. If price does get above the weekly pivot, your first level of resistance is going to be the monthly pivot, which is at 87.57 level, and currently the weekly pivot for the AUD yen is going to be at 87.14. Well, that's all the pairs I'm going over this week. I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you have any questions how price is with the pivots, feel free to send me a message. I would love to answer any questions you may have. Alright, take care and have a good week.